The plaza erupted into chaos in a single heartbeat. 1 second, shoppers were strolling under the golden afternoon sun, enjoying the usual bustle of downtown life. The next, an arrogant police officer's hand struck Will Smith's grandmother across the cheek, and the sound of the slap echoed like a gunshot. Gasps spread instantly through the crowd, and all eyes turned toward the unfolding drama. Across the plaza, Will Smith froze, shock and anger written clearly across his face, realizing that the dignity of his grandmother had just been violated in public. Despite the sharp sting, Will Smith's grandmother remained composed. She straightened her back, gripping her polished cane lightly, and met the officer's eyes with quiet authority. "Officer," she said, voice calm but firm, "I'm simply passing through. I will move if necessary, but there is no need for violence or intimidation." The arrogant police officer's jaw tightened, his face reddening with frustration. "I said move. Now," he barked, stepping closer, finger jabbing aggressively toward her cane. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Phones were raised instinctively. "Did he just hit her?" someone whispered. "She's 85, another cried. The incident had become more than a minor confrontation. It was now a public spectacle. Will Smith pushed back his chair, coffee forgotten, and moved forward. His expression was a mix of disbelief and protective fury. He didn't yell. He didn't rush the officer. Yet his calm intensity and commanding presence instantly drew the attention of everyone around. Bystanders instinctively stepped back, cameras raised, sensing that this was no ordinary conflict. The arrogant police officer may have assumed he could intimidate an elderly woman, but he had gravely underestimated both her dignity and the grandson who now stood ready to defend her. Will Smith's grandmother whispered softly to him, "Let him see what he's done." Will nodded, understanding the power behind her words. This wasn't just a moment of personal outrage. It was a lesson in patience, dignity, and moral authority. The officer attempted to straighten himself, tried to regain his sense of control. But the shift in energy around him was undeniable. The crowd's focus, once diffuse, was now entirely on the confrontation. Phones clicked and recorded every movement, every expression, every word. The arrogant police officer's confidence faltered. The realization crept in too late. This single, impulsive act of violence would have consequences far beyond the plaza. Will Smith stepped closer, voice calm but razor sharp. "Do you honestly think hurting her would go unnoticed?" he asked. Every word carried the weight of moral authority, cutting through the tension like a knife. The officer flinched, finally sensing the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just about authority or rules anymore. It was about public judgment, dignity, and consequences. Bystanders began speaking up, some shouting at the officer, others whispering into their phones while recording the entire scene. The incident was already going viral in the span of moments. Social media would spread the footage instantly, magnifying the humiliation the officer would soon face. The plaza, once calm, had transformed into a living courtroom, with Will Smith and his grandmother standing as the unspoken jury. The officer raised his hand as if to assert authority again, but the crowd's energy, combined with Will Smith's presence and the grandmother's calm resolve, made him pause. His words faltered. Every second that passed, the consequences of his reckless action became more real. Phones clicked, cameras focused, and the whispers of outrage grew louder. He realized, too late, that this 1 second, this one slap, had already changed everything. Will Smith's grandmother leaned lightly on his arm, whispering, "Patience, strength, and dignity are far more powerful than anger." Will nodded, letting her calm guide him. He understood. Every step he took, every expression he held, radiated both protective instinct and moral authority. The arrogant police officer, once brimming with confidence, now felt the first tremors of regret. The plaza seemed suspended in time, every bystander frozen between disbelief and fascination. Phones clicked and recorded, capturing not just the slap, but the unfolding aftermath. Will Smith standing protectively beside his grandmother, radiating controlled fury, and the arrogant police officer, slowly realizing that the tide had turned against him. The air felt heavy, almost electric, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Whispers spread through the crowd. "She's so composed." And he hit her, someone murmured, shaking their head. Another person raised their phone higher, ensuring that the officer's moment of shame would be seen far beyond the plaza. The arrogant police officer shifted his weight uneasily, a bead of sweat running down his temple. He cleared his throat, attempting to reassert authority, but the words stuck in his throat. Authority, once absolute in his mind, now seemed fragile and meaningless under the public gaze. Will Smith took a measured step closer, his eyes never leaving the officer. "You think this ends with just one slap?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with warning. "Do you understand who you've disrespected? And do you realize that everyone here has seen exactly what you did?" The officer's face paled. The crowd reacted audibly to Will's words, murmuring, nodding, and holding their phones steady. For the first time, the arrogant police officer truly understood that this was bigger than a single confrontation. Will Smith's grandmother stood tall, cane in hand, observing silently. Her eyes conveyed a mixture of disappointment and pride, as though she were reminding the officer and the crowd alike that dignity is not given. It is earned, maintained, and defended. "Let him see the consequences," she whispered to Will. "You don't need to raise your voice. Let him face what he has done." Will nodded, understanding the lesson, and allowed his presence to speak louder than words. The arrogant police officer's confidence continued to crumble. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his hands twitching as he searched for some semblance of control. Every person recording him, every whisper of outrage, every glance from Will Smith reminded him that the plaza had become a living courtroom. In the eyes of hundreds, perhaps thousands more online, he had already been judged. Regret, sharp and immediate, clawed at him. 1 second, one act, and the full weight of his mistake was clear. Bystanders began approaching cautiously, some speaking out. "How can he hit an elderly woman?" one asked. "She's 85, someone else exclaimed. Each word, each recorded video, each shocked stare multiplied the officer's humiliation. The plaza was no longer just a public space. It had become the stage for accountability, powered by dignity, presence, and the moral authority of Will Smith and his grandmother. Will Smith remained calm, guiding his grandmother gently as they began to move away. Each step projected both strength and restraint. Behind them, the crowd's attention followed, phones capturing every frame, voices murmuring in awe at her composure and his protective presence. The arrogant police officer was left standing in the center of the plaza, exposed, humiliated, and acutely aware that in just 1 second, his life had changed forever. In that moment, the plaza seemed to tilt on its axis. Every phone in every hand was recording, every whisper growing louder, and every gaze fixed on the scene reminded the arrogant police officer that there was no hiding from what he had done. He realized that this one reckless action, a single slap to an elderly woman, had already transcended the immediate moment. The world was watching. Will Smith guided his grandmother a few steps forward, each movement deliberate, calm, and measured. She leaned lightly on his arm, her eyes scanning the crowd with quiet awareness, her dignity intact despite the sting on her cheek. "Let them see the consequences of their actions," she murmured, voice steady. Strength is silent. Anger fades, but moral clarity lasts. Will's jaw tightened as he nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He knew that this was not just about protecting his grandmother. It was about holding accountable the arrogance that assumed it could strike without consequence. The arrogant police officer tried to speak, to assert some fragment of authority, but his voice faltered under the weight of collective scrutiny. The murmurs of the crowd escalated, some shouting questions, others calling for accountability. "She's 85. How can he hit her?" someone exclaimed. Phones raised higher, recording the officer's every gesture, every twitch, every faltering word. The plaza had become a living stage, and the officer had unwittingly cast himself as the villain. Will Smith turned slightly toward him, eyes piercing yet controlled. "Do you understand the gravity of what you just did?" he asked, voice low but carrying across the crowd. "Do you know that every single person here, and thousands more watching online, has seen exactly how you treat an elderly woman?" The officer's face drained of color. Sweat formed along his temples. He had thought authority would protect him. He had thought arrogance would intimidate. And now, he realized he had miscalculated entirely. Will Smith's grandmother adjusted her grip on the cane, standing straighter than ever. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, reflected both wisdom and quiet fire. The arrogant police officer could feel the weight of her presence, as if it pressed down on him physically. In the span of a few moments, every second had compounded into the inevitability of his reckoning. The plaza had become a mirror of moral consequence, and he could not escape it. By now, the crowd had swelled. Onlookers had formed a semicircle, leaving a clear path for Will Smith and his grandmother, while murmuring and filming everything. Voices rose in indignation. "Call the precinct. He needs to answer for this," shouted someone near the front. Others whispered to the cameras, commenting on the viral potential of the moment. The officer's arrogance faltered further as he realized that his single action had already transcended local scrutiny. It was spreading across social media faster than he could contain. Will Smith remained composed, taking careful, deliberate steps, radiating protective authority. His grandmother's calm presence amplified the power of his stance. "I suggest you reflect on what you've done," Will said quietly, letting every word hang like a warning. "You struck an elderly woman. You attacked dignity itself. And now, the world is watching." The officer's hand twitched involuntarily. His mind raced, imagining the consequences: viral videos, public outrage, disciplinary action, perhaps even legal consequences. A ripple ran through the plaza as more bystanders whispered and recorded. The arrogant police officer looked around, noticing dozens of phones trained on him, some already live streaming. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was no longer a private incident. There would be no simple apology, no quick forgetfulness. The weight of 1 second, one slap, had cemented itself into public memory. Will Smith's grandmother leaned on him slightly, whispering, "Remember, strength does not need to shout." Let him feel the magnitude of his own actions. Her calm, quiet command seemed to amplify the officer's sense of doom. His posture slumped slightly, his confidence shattered. In that moment, he understood, too late, that his arrogance had led him to underestimate not just the dignity of an elderly woman, but the authority and moral clarity that radiated from her grandson. Every step Will took, guiding his grandmother towards safety, magnified the contrast between control and chaos. The officer fumbled with his uniform, attempting to regain composure, but it was clear to everyone watching that the moment had passed him by. The first true instant of regret, the 1-second realization that his actions had irrevocably crossed a line, had already struck. And just like that, the plaza, the phones, the whispers, and the eyes of strangers all converged to enforce a simple, undeniable truth: arrogance against dignity cannot stand. 1 second, one slap, one instant of thoughtless cruelty had changed everything. The officer would never forget it.